Hello, listeners. This is Kat. Welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of All For You. This will be Part 9, Days 15 and 16. Day 15. Hasashi had made the call to Garaki before Nezu left yesterday. He had not slept that night, again, for multiple reasons. Paranoia about Izuku's health, avoiding nightmares or memories, thoughts of Inko's funeral, which he had still yet to do anything about. His mind had been abuzz, and just like always, there was no escape in the NICU. It wasn't like he could read one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. It was stimulating literature for Izuku, but not for him. At a loss for anything to distract himself, Hasashi finally picked up his phone to look at something other than his messages. He tapped the news app, and was immediately assaulted with news about Garaki. It seemed the big story was the doctor's arrest and his secret, twisted experiments. It hadn't even been 24 hours yet. Hasashi sighed, staring at a picture of the lab that had become oh so familiar to him over the years, now decimated. He had been hoping to find some silly celebrity story to take his mind off of his situation, not more information about his situation from a different perspective. Hasashi put his phone back to sleep and put it back in his pocket. He stared blankly at his hands. He couldn't truly say he was surprised. It only made sense that the dissolving of his empire would make the news. He could only hope they would be unable to trace it back to him. And Izuku. Hasashi turned away from his lap and looked out the window. The sky was still dark, lights and stars still glittering like gems set in a ring. Yet there were hints of a new dawn among the horizon, sunshine creeping weakly into the sky. The call to Garaki had been a surprisingly hard call to make. To act normal when everything had changed, to lead one of his most trusted associates to their certain demise. It was painful. He couldn't help but feel gutted at the loss of all their hard work. Hasashi had worked with Garaki for so long. He would have trusted Garaki with his very life, and yet Hasashi could not have done so with Izuku's. He knew that in his bones. Izuku was too fragile, too much like the targets they had their eyes on for future human tests. Had Izuku fallen under Garaki's care, something would have gone wrong, he was sure of it. His condition would have deteriorated, and he would have died, just like Inko. Just like Yoichi. Then he would have disappeared into one of those glowing tubes, destined to become a test subject dedicated to All For One's immortality and nothing more. With this decision, immortality was truly out of his reach now. Hasashi stiffened. A familiar fear lit under his breastbone. The specter of death loomed over him once again, waiting for the right time, for the right mistake. Had it been worth it? Was he making the right decision? Izuku shifted quietly beside him. There was a new tube going into Izuku's nose. He was far from well, even if he was recovering, but they were going to start giving him very small meals of donated milk. Mitsuki insisted it come from her, to at least start the switch from IV nutrition to eating like a normal baby. He had not been happy about the tube insertion. He had looked like he was crying despite his silence. Izuku couldn't make a sound while on the ventilator. Hasashi had to hold himself back from ripping the nurse away from his baby, even if they said it didn't hurt him at all. It just felt strange. He was quiet now, though. Hasashi looked over, watching him stretch his limbs out as he tried to find a new, more comfortable position. He raised his arms. Tiny fingers played in smooth, relaxed movements. One leg stretched, then the other. Izuku curled up, his legs folded against his belly and his arms tucked to his chest. One fist pushed against his cheek, scrunching his face up. Izuku suckled on his pacifier as he settled into a slumber once again, despite the early morning sunbeams scattering through the plastic of his incubator. Hasashi smiled. He reached a careful hand, the hand that hadn't touched his phone, into one of the incubator portholes and pulled Inko's baby blanket over Izuku's legs. He didn't want to imagine life without Izuku. He couldn't. It would break him. This was his reality now. So yes. Yes, it was. Ring, 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 ring. Hello, this is Inko Midoriya. I'm sorry I missed your call. Please leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Beep. He's beautiful, Inko. I wish you could have met him. Call ended. Day 16. To be honest, All Might, Nezu said amicably as All Might stared blankly at the test results in front of him. I'm not quite sure what you expected. The test results were for a paternity test. The baby was 99.9% most likely to be All For One's son. There wasn't really any arguing with that, even if it meant accepting that All for One had been intimate with someone. Toshinori shook the awful thought from his mind. This, however, is quite unexpected, Nezu said, sliding another paper out onto the table, a copy each for All Might, Gran Torino, and Sir Night-Eye. All Might grabbed a copy and flipped it over warily before blinking at the nonsense results, which stated that Yagi, Toshinori, and Nana Shimura were also distant matches to Izuku Midoriya. What? All Might said, white noise on loop in his brain. Fascinating, isn't it? Nezu said cheerfully. That's one way of putting it, Gran grumbled, glaring at the paper like it had personally offended him, which it might have. This, Night-Eye said, his brows furrowed in deep thought. Could be because of One for All, couldn't it? All Might blinked blankly. Most likely, yes, Nezu said. Explain, Gran said. One for All is a quirk that is passed through DNA exposure, according to what All Might told me, Night-Eye said, looking at All Might. All Might nodded in confirmation. One for All originated from All for One's sibling, so if it is passed through DNA and possibly integrated into the user's own genetic code, stands to reason that would cause this. Well put, Nezu said. Thank you, sir, Night-Eye said, sounding rather pleased. All Might looked down at the paper. It listed Nana Shimura as a distant match, but it did not include Kotaro, her son. Perhaps it was because of One for All's transfer mechanism. He thought of that tiny foot he had seen nearly a week ago. The image haunted him, almost as much as the baby's father did. Fully processing the fact that All for One had a child made a chill go down his spine. There was the possibility that the baby could turn out just like him. There was a possibility that the baby would get a quirk like his. There was the possibility that the baby would lead to 2 All for Ones. But he thought of that little foot. There was a name next to Hasashi Midoriya, the only name they had on file for All for One, though it was probably fake. On the family tree the paternity test produced, Inko Midoriya. There was a picture of her next to her name, and her eyes looked kind. The only way they would get 2 All for Ones was if they let the baby stay with that monster. He had an idea. The baby has a family relation to me through One for All, Toshinori pointed out, looking at Nezu, Gran, and Night-Eye. I can take him, and then... I'm not certain, Night-Eye started. Toshinori, Gran snapped. And what benefit to the situation would that confer? Nezu asked softly. Toshinori's jaw worked. It was a spur-of-the-moment idea, but it felt so right. He needed to save that baby. Because I would be a better father than him, Toshinori said, his hands clenching. Taking on the responsibility of raising a child was never something Toshinori had considered in his wildest dreams, not after what happened to Shimura-sensei, at least not until right now. It was something he was wildly unprepared for. Toshinori knew that, if he did, or could, accept the responsibility of this child, he had a lot to learn. He knew nothing about childcare, and even less about finding a work-life balance between his hero work and childcare. But if it meant that baby would be loved and safe and raised well, then it would be worth it. Tell me, All Might, Nezu said softly. Between settling the public, rescuing civilians, and tearing down All for One's empire, would you have the time to take care of a child? I would make time, Toshinori said. If Shimura-sensei had found a way to make it work, he would too. Gran, Night-Eye, and Nezu stared at him. I would make time, Toshinori repeated firmly. All Might, Nezu said pointedly. Toshinori met Nezu's black eyes head-on. Yes. Nezu sighed. Ignoring the risk of drawing All for One's ire by trying to take away someone important enough to him to cease villain activity, I will come back to that. All Might, I want to emphasize that this child is far from any definition of well. Toshinori thought of that foot. I know that, he said. He's very premature. Prematurity comes with a lot of risks, Toshinori, Gran grunted. Nana was terrified of preterm labor. There's a good reason for that. He is not only premature, Nezu said softly. He is very ill, All Might. He has a dangerous congenital heart defect. He will likely face repercussions of his prematurity and his condition for the rest of his life. He's already had 1 major heart surgery, and the only way he won't be needing more is if he dies. The thought of that tiny, tiny baby having major heart surgery made Toshinori sick to his stomach. Would you have time to take him to all the doctor appointments? Nezu continued relentlessly. Time to take care of him when he is ill? Will you be able to make sure he takes all his medications and is managing his conditions? Would you have time to learn about his condition, spend time with him in the hospital when he is ill or needs procedures? Would you have time to make sure that he has friends, that he is doing well in school, that you are able to help him as necessary? Would you have the time to truly be there for this child, all while being the pillar you have spent your life working to become? Yes, Toshinori said after a moment's pause. The hesitation in your voice speaks volumes, Nezu said. The hesitation is only because it is a sudden change, not because I am unwilling, Toshinori protested. Nezu blinked, his eyes inscrutable. Then he continued. Now to address the elephant in the room, that is his father. As unbelievable as it may be, it is clear to me that All for One truly cares for his child. He has obviously lost sleep and has worried frequently over his well-being, and he was very protective of the infant when I came close, even though he tried to hide it. According to the agreement All for One is proposing, he would willingly be ceasing any and all villainous activity in exchange for full custody of his son. For all intents and purposes, All for One is retiring. His full-time job would be the care of his son, and taking care of his son will be a full-time job. Nezu leveled his gaze at Toshinori. It is of my opinion that All for One would kill many, many people to stay by his child, yet he is offering to back down completely. I know you are a smart man, Toshinori Yagi. Tell me, what do you think would happen if we were to pull his child out of reach? He would likely level UA, at the very least, Night-Eye murmured. Toshinori sighed heavily. Putting his head in his hands, he had seen firsthand what All for One had done to try and get his brother's quirk back. UA would be gravel before they even had time to prepare. The Arima incident would have nothing on what All for One was capable of. The entirety of Japan would be in danger, maybe more. I can't take him, Toshinori admitted bitterly. I believe taking him would be a poor decision, Nezu agreed. But Toshinori sat back in his chair, growling. We can't just let him raise the baby however he wants. He would end up hurting the poor thing. Toshinori ran his hands through his hair. I can't just stand by and do nothing while he twists that child into something awful. Yagi, Nezu interrupted. Toshinori looked up. At the moment, you are the hero All for One has asked to sponsor him. Toshinori frowned at the reminder, but said nothing. He has shown himself to be willing to take drastic steps to keep his child. If there are terms you would like to add, it is well within reason for you to negotiate them. Toshinori's brows furrowed. If this agreement goes through, Toshinori started, looking up at Nezu. I want to be able to check on the baby, whenever I want, so he can't prepare an act. I want to personally make sure that All for One is never going to go back on his word and return to his villainous ways, especially to the detriment of that child. Nezu smiled. I think that is reasonable. The hallucinations had returned. He couldn't particularly say he was surprised. He'd hit 8 days of no sleep again, maybe 9 if the calendar had turned over already. It was some ungodly time in the morning right now, so it wasn't like it truly mattered. Hasashi squinted his tired, aching, heavy eyes on the horde of shadows glaring at him from the corners. They seemed slightly more distinct this time, less like a mass of monsters and more like a mob of angry people. They were disturbingly close to the nightmares he occasionally had, where the people he had stolen quirks from hurled insults and abuse at him. They had become less of an issue after he truly connected with Inko, because she helped him deal with them, but, well, she wasn't here anymore. Hasashi rubbed a hand down his face harshly and hoped they were just as powerless in real life as they were in his dreams. That hope didn't stop him from staring the mob down as soon as they started to inch too close to Izuku, nor did it stop the chilling feeling of icy fear crawling along his spine when he saw them move out of the corner of his eyes. The lingering specter of fear was becoming somewhat familiar, though, so he would push through. He had to. Mitsuki and Masaru were busy with their own baby now, and there was no one else he trusted to watch Izuku while he rested. Perhaps Gigantomachia, but his size posed a slight problem, so that option was cast aside for now. It was less than ideal, but at least he had experience being this tired before now. It would be fine. He would not be a detriment to Izuku's safety. Midoriya-san? A voice asked, cutting through his thoughts. Hasashi jumped, his body going stiff as his head whipped toward the voice. Taro, another night shift nurse, stared at him. Hasashi stared back. Taro smiled. Hasashi sighed, rubbing a hand down his face again. My apologies. It's no problem, Midoriya-san, the nurse said. I just wanted to check on you. I've just been taking some samples from little Izuku here, and you never noticed because you had been staring very hard in that corner for, a while now. Ah, Hasashi said, heat rising to his cheeks. How long had he been doing that? He'd lost track. Is there something concerning in that corner, sir? Taro asked. If there was, I'm pretty sure it's croaked, what with the way you were glaring over there. No, of course not. I'm perfectly fine, Hasashi reassured, sitting back in his recliner and trying to look relaxed, even as he saw the mob inching closer in his vision. Taro looked over at the corner pointedly, then back to him. Would you like to try again, sir? Hasashi blinked. What? Taro smiled crookedly, though not unfriendly. Sir, your eye bags rival Shinso's, and he has an insomnia quirk. They aren't that bad, Hasashi muttered, one hand rising to poke at them. An insomnia quirk would explain why Shinso was the first nurse to start supplying him with coffee. With all due respect, Midoriya-san, they are, Taro said with a chuckle. Hasashi huffed. To add, I think both you and I know what happens when someone goes too long without any sleep, though I have the suspicion that you might know from personal experience, Taro said. Well, Hasashi said, looking away. Perhaps, he acquiesced. Taro huffed. Yeah, perhaps. Hasashi said nothing. Taro sighed, leaning against the wall as he gathered up his supplies and blood samples he took from Izuku. I can't stay here much longer because I have to get these to the lab, but Midoriya-san, you really need to get some sleep. Severely sleep-deprived people. I have been using stamina quirks, Hasashi protested. And you are still hallucinating, Taro pointed out with a raised eyebrow. Hasashi grumbled. Taro continued. As I was saying, severely sleep-deprived people make bad decisions, which is not something I would assume you want as Izuku's decision-maker. Don't you think that is more of a danger to the little guy than his dad sleeping in a bed less than 2 meters away from him where he can hear any alarm that might go off? You have a point, Taro, Hasashi agreed. I'll rest. Just in a moment. Taro smiled, said good, and left. Hasashi sighed. He knew the young man was probably right, but he wasn't tired. He would not be a detriment to Izuku's safety. He was fine. The door opened less than an hour later to one rather upset Sanuki-san. Sanuki-san dragged a chair over and sat in it, staring him down. Hasashi fidgeted. All for One was not one to waver under stares. He had stared down Yakuza, mass murderers, heroes, political leaders, all sorts of people, and never once quavered under their eyes. It was always the other person that gave first. But Sanuki-san was one of Izuku's doctors. She was one of the ones leading the team that took care of his son and made sure he lived to see each morning. And Izuku was everything to Hasashi. He didn't particularly want to upset her, especially not when Izuku's health and Hasashi's custody situation were so precarious. Hasashi cleared his throat. Ah. Hello, Sanuki-san. I wasn't aware rounds had finished already. What do you think my job is here? Sanuki-san asked, interrupting him. Hasashi stared. He didn't like this. He knew the answer, but he had a feeling there was a trick to this question he was too tired to figure out. To care for premature infants, he answered anyway. You're half right, Sanuki-san said. Hasashi fidgeted again. He really didn't like this. The other half of my job is making sure that guardians are able to take care of their babies, Sanuki-san stated. I am capable, Hasashi interrupted, sitting up straighter. You are in no shape to take care of anyone, Sanuki-san said, shutting him up quickly. Much less a premature infant. Hasashi sat back, fear crawling along his back like the mob he still saw in the corners of his eyes. He swallowed hard, but it felt like someone was strangling him. His aching eyes stung. You, he pushed out, his voice suddenly tight. You aren't going to take. He couldn't say the word. He was doing everything he possibly could to stay with his son. Everything. What had he done wrong? Couldn't he fix it? Sanuki-san raised an eyebrow. To take Izuku away? Hasashi nodded mutely. She sighed. No, Midoriya-san, I'm not recommending they take Izuku away. He could breathe again. She leveled him with another glare, and Hasashi just barely resisted the urge to sink into his chair. I am saying that I need to know how long it has been since you last slept. Hasashi blinked. Oh, it was this again. It shouldn't matter. I've been using stamina quirks. How long has it been since you slept? Sanuki-san's voice brokered no room for leniency. 8 days. Hasashi mumbled reluctantly. Again. Yes. After 24 hours without sleep, it's the equivalent of being too drunk to drive. After 8 days, I wouldn't trust you to scramble an egg. Stamina quirks may help a little, but not that goddamn much, Sanuki-san said mercilessly. As it stands, you pose the largest risk to Izuku's safety by neglecting your own health. I know Taro told you what sleep deprivation does, so we're not going to rehash that. Instead, you are going to lay down, and you are going to get some sleep, and you are not going to argue with me about this. Hasashi sank down ever so slightly in his chair. He felt a little like a scolded child, for some reason. Fine, Hasashi pushed out reluctantly. I'll go get some sleep. He did not move from his chair. Neither did Sanuki-san. She blinked slowly. Then go, she said. Don't you have something more important to do? Hasashi grumbled. Unfortunately, Sanuki-san seemed entirely unaffected. Important things like making sure my patients' parents don't become patients themselves, she countered. Hasashi scowled. Anger fought with anxiety in his chest. He despised being told what to do, being talked down to like an idiot, and yet, was he really that much of a risk to Izuku's safety? It wasn't like he was driving a car or even frying an egg. He was just sitting in a chair and watching over his son. I used to work medical at Tartarus, Sanuki-san said firmly, absolutely no give in her stern expression. This is nothing. Glare at me all you want, but that won't change my orders. How much harm can I really do just by sitting here? Hasashi pushed back. He found it hard to believe that he was truly doing anything wrong here. Even trying to imagine his idealistic little brother's reaction, which was typically a rather good tell as to whether something was right or wrong according to society's moronic morality chains, told him that he was fine, though he supposed if he imagined Yoichi far younger than he usually did, he would be upset with Hasashi for not sleeping. This, Sanuki-san said, motioning toward him, is self-destructive behavior. A child does not need a self-destructive parent because that is an adult they will end up parenting. Violently, Hasashi was thrown back to the days he had still lived with Yoichi in their parents' house, learning to cook when he could barely reach the stove, cleaning up rotten garbage and glass bottles so Yoichi wouldn't get hurt, distracting or appeasing or comforting his revolting, worthless, pathetic parents so they would leave him and, more importantly, Yoichi alone. The mere idea of becoming a parent even remotely similar to his own was so abhorrent, it made him nauseous. Children model the behavior they see in others, especially their parents, Midoriya-san. If I or any other practitioner here lets you get into the habit of neglecting yourself now, then you will be setting a poor example for Izuku. You will be setting him up for failure, Sanuki-san finished. Part of him wanted to try and figure out if her words were more to manipulate him into doing what she wanted or if they were simply the hard truth. The other part realized that it didn't matter. His petty pride was not worth his son's health. Understood, Hasashi said, and forced himself to stand up. He looked down at Izuku, brushing a hand against the incubator. He could be a better parent than his own. The bar was below the dirt. He had to be a better parent. Hasashi slowly tore his hand away from the incubator and muttered, I'll be right back. As he headed to the bathroom to quickly get ready for bed, he wasn't sleeping in jeans. When he walked out, Sanuki-san was still there, watching him. Hasashi paused by his chair, resisting the all-encompassing urge to sit back in and refuse to move. The bar was below the dirt. He had to be better, and if the first step of being better was sleeping, then he was sleeping. He kept walking and slowly sat on the mattress. It was a hospital bed, so the sheets were starchy and stiff, and the mattress was mediocre. It still felt like heaven. He pulled the sheets over his lap and looked back up at Sanuki-san. Satisfied? He asked, unable to keep the dry snap from his voice. She stared, gave the barest hint of a smile, and nodded. I will stay until you are asleep. If anything goes wrong, these alarms will go off, and you will be the first one up. Izuku is safe. Izuku is fine. You will be better for everyone involved, including Izuku, if you have slept. Now sleep. Reluctantly, Hasashi nodded. The mob lurked in the edges of the room. Their shadows constantly moved and shifted. Their glowing eyes narrowed to hateful slits. Their hands still clawed along the walls and floor, but they did not get any closer to Izuku. He forced himself to lie down and close his eyes. He deactivated his stamina quirks and was out instantly. He did not dream. All right, listeners, this concludes Day 16 of All For You. Day 17 will be next. Hope you all are enjoying this fix so far, and as always, thank you so much for listening.